All right, everybody. For everybody on the line, we'll get started in about 1 minute, right at the top of the hour. So sit tight. We'll get going. All right, so it's 12 o'clock, and we'll go ahead and go. We got probably a good topic to get through today. Just to introduce myself, my name is Wayne Welk, Automation Specialist with the Realms Company in New Orleans, and just going to kind of kick things off quickly here, and then turn over to our guest speaker, Luis Ramos with Rockwell Automation. So as usual, we'll do our introduction slides, and just short and sweet today, but just more to show what's coming up over the next couple of weeks, or I'm sorry, next couple of months for our user groups. We have May and June pretty much defined, and July and August is kind of open at the moment. So we'll get those topics figured out here pretty quick. And as always, you know, we welcome any feedback from our audience. If there's a topic you'd like us to cover, or even kind of rehash through some of the topics we've done in the past, be more than happy to present those. So just always reach out to us. Next month, May 15th, we're going to kind of cover the VUSC version 11 update, which is a new release, but also kind of tie it in with the ISA 101 high performance HMI standards and how they kind of fit with each other. So Luis Ramos will actually be in New Orleans for that one and present, as well as our own Dean Bickerton, who's also ISA section, New Orleans section president, will also help present on the ISA part of that. So that's going to be a good one in May. And then in June, as we you know, all get ready for summer vacations, we'll do a edge computing topic with Stratus. They have a new the ZTC Edge server, which is a really nice product. We actually have a demo of it now in New Orleans, and so it'd be a good presentation just to kind of show that product off. And then again, like I said, July, August, we will definitely fill. Of course, our archive is always posted on our kind of our automation blog site. So we have the archive and the schedule available to look at. And then just a couple other things to plug real quick is in June, we're planning to have the Rockwell Automation on tour again this year. Some of those details will get finalized here, hopefully over the next several weeks. The on tour is of course when all the demo cases kind of come in to our office and we set them up, and you guys can kind of come in at your leisure and work through labs, very similar to the labs you would do if you were going to tech ed. And of course, speaking of tech ed, that is coming up in early June, Orlando this year. So June 3rd to the 7th. Registration is open, so if you do plan to go, you should probably register soon, because that event usually sells out fairly quickly. And then, of course, Automation Fair is off in the distance in Chicago, so always plugging that away. So with that, here's a nice picture of Luis, so you kind of can have a mental image of who's talking. So Ramos, solution architect, and ISA, IEC 62443 cybersecurity expert. So he's very well versed to present our topic today, which of course is CIP Security. So I'm gonna stop sharing. I'm gonna let Luis take the screen and present from here.
Let's see.
Yeah.
You let me know if you can see it.
Gotcha. Yep.
Cool. So in the room with me is Zachary Rogan. So he usually does our nice little watching event over there in Lake Charles. So unfortunately, they couldn't do it over there. So he'll be with me. So if you guys have questions, feel free to write them in, or both Wayne and Zachary will kind of help me out with questions while we go through it. And then, so I'm going to introduce CIP Security. I also want to start the conversation with some of the kind of overall features that Rockwell has when it comes to cybersecurity that you guys may or may not already know about. One of the things, and when we start talking about CIP, Common Industrial Protocol, or Ethernet IP, this is going to be a new topic for us on CIP Security. Usually we talk about it from CIP Sync for time synchronization, or start looking at it for CIP safety on like machine safety and things of that nature. So with CIP Security, we're going to be looking at like cybersecurity attackers, and what you'll see from my presentation is we don't like people with hoodies, apparently. So all of those guys in the hoodies, we're looking at 3 distinct different avenues for an attacker to come in. One is a direct connection. A big one in our industry is man in the middle, and then monitoring of data. So just to level set a little bit, just like Wayne mentioned, I got my certification from the IACS 62443. Zachary also has a certification on 62443, so we kind of run the gamut on trying to make sure that we kind of understand what some of the pain points might be. But from a Rockwell point of view, we registered through both NIST, Homeland Security, the certs, and then ISA. So a lot of it is talking about defense in depth and looking at that side of it. But the main one that we've been partnering with, especially over the last year, has been 62443. So for anybody that might be new to that kind of terminology, or you haven't seen that, it is a series of standards when it comes to what they call IACS, Industrial Automation and Control System. So generally speaking, this is going to be more on the OT side, the operational technology. This will be kind of looking at from a process skid environment, DCS plays, all of the controllers, the software, the networking that would be layer 3 and below. But it does also interface on how we would do communication all the way up through the business layer. So traditionally speaking, 62443 gets a little prescriptive. So the book was over 500 pages. And I will not promise that I read all 500 pages. I read most of them. I took a couple naps in between. So what it does is it kind of goes through this, the system, and to give you guys an overview of what that might look like is it's broken up into 4 main sections. Generally speaking, we only talk about the first 3. The last one is dedicated to vendors like myself on the Rockwell side. So from that general policy and procedure and system point of view, when we're talking about the different sections of 62443, or we're looking at doing cybersecurity assessments, the general side, think of that in realistic terms of definitions. So you're setting up your models, your concepts, you're looking at the definitions on cybersecurity and what everything means, what it means to be compliant, what the different levels of your life cycle would be. The policies and procedures would be going in and understanding your system and what the requirements would be to get to your cybersecurity audits. So you can see there from 2-3, the patch management on how you would do that, your different security programs. And then a bulk of all of the information is under that system category. So 3-1 to 3-3. One big thing that we look at from a 3-3 is this is where it gets very prescriptive. When we start looking at an assessment for cybersecurity, or if you're trying to figure out where your risk would be, we would be able to look at it from your security target levels and also your security levels themselves. Very similar ideas to what we deal with on a process safety environment, and it's actually using a lot of the same people when we're doing the assessments. But we would get prescriptive down to what your password would look like, the remote access pieces, the ability of being able to tie into your USB keys, things of that nature, and all the different levels that you would require based on what your level of security risk would be. The big component that you'll see in what I highlighted in on the right-hand side there, so you got your standards, you're talking about your availability, your integrity, and confidentiality. That's usually how you're kind of looking at your system. But what we'll talk later in the presentation is also looking at what's called zones and conduits. And this is how you would look at it from an architecture point of view and seeing where your risk levels might be and how you would protect against those communication paths. So I'll talk about it a little bit later. Another one that you guys may have seen or talked about is from a NIST point of view. There's a cybersecurity framework. So I added that one in there just so you guys are aware of it. That's another big one that we usually reference out in the field. This is broken down into identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. A big thing when we start talking about this, especially when I have conversations with customers, is we can only do so much to protect the system. At some point, we also have to plan for what we do to mitigate, detect, and respond to the system. So a lot of these discussions surround around, like, think of Asset Center, where we're able to track the changes that happen at your automation system side, being able to log who's logging in, who's making modifications, who's logging into your HMI system. So all of those type of systems in place would kind of go with what we usually refer to as the security onion. So this holistic approach is not only, there's no one thing that you can do from a cybersecurity point of view that will protect your entire infrastructure. I wish there was, but it's not ever going to happen. So what we'll end up doing is breaking down into multiple different sections, and you create the amount of security needed for the type of risk that you plan on taking into account. A majority of this is usually device, application, computer, network. Those are all from a physical infrastructure. And then the biggest thing that we usually look at from a cybersecurity point of view is your policies, procedures, and the personnel that you have. Unfortunately, everything is kind of down to its weakest link. A lot of the times, if you guys have probably all seen this, somebody puts a little Post-it note with the password on the monitor that gets you into the system, or your HMI system has the same operators, so they never log in and log out. So those are the type of things that we also would look at from a policies and procedures point of view. To give a little bit of an overview, I'm keeping this very high level. And like I said, you guys can ask questions and type them in and we'll ask them. But what we are planning on doing, especially there with Wayne, is we are looking to see about doing a deeper dive into kind of like a cybersecurity 101 course. So I'm working with Wayne to see maybe sometime in the summer for me to go out there and maybe invite a couple other vendors and have a few tabletop discussions. So if that's something that you guys are interested in, or you do have a couple topics that you want us to cover, let us know. Either reach out to Wayne or myself or even Zachary and just let it known that there's the interest, and then we'll try to figure out and schedule something. So we'll definitely be letting you guys know about that type of stuff. So just to level set a little bit, so this slide, and it's a secure network infrastructure. One of the things that we have been doing from a Rockwell point of view, I want to cover, I want to cover a couple of the things that are already existing to this day that you guys can pull down information. About back in 2011 is when we came out with the Converged Plant-Wide Ethernet Design Guide from Cisco. So we do the partnership for all of our managed switches are all Cisco based. So we have all the design and implementation guides that are all white papers devoted to communication, either via Cisco or via the Stratix switches, from low end level design all the way up through the top end. You can see some of the topics here are traversing the IDMZ. So how we would pass information back and forth between the OT side and the IT side, identity services, VPN connections, how to deploy a resilient network. All of these are guides to an extent for just the networking side, but also talking about some of the cybersecurity options that you have, including firewall configurations with our Stratix 5950s. So if there's things that you need to look at from a networking point of view, if you follow the link, and like always, you guys will have a copy of these, the presentations, you can go to our website and download all of these. They're all free. And the last one that we released was probably March 2019. So The other thing, to get into a little bit of cybersecurity hygiene, what you'll see now and what you'll start seeing in the future is we are starting to document the infrastructure changes and what you should do to be able to do like the 62443 that 3-3 that I was talking about. That's very prescriptive. We will be putting this all documented in one location. Right now, this is going to sit as part of our Plant PX system infrastructure guide. So this is the documentation that released with our recent DCS release. So Plant PX system 4.5 release had plenty of documentation around selection guides, reference architecture guides, and also this infrastructure configuration guide. Right now, everything that's in black, so work group policies, how we would handle USB policies, password complexities, VLANing, things of that nature all exist in that manual right now. In the summer, we will have a Plant PX 4.6 minor release, along with documentation for firewall and wireless access connections down to the switch level for the static switches. We will also have some new templates that are releasing that are all 2016 compliant. So keep an eye on that. One of the things that you guys should be aware of from a Rockwell point of view is that section 4 on that 62443 little chart that I had. Rockwell now has 4-1 certification on the development side as a vendor. So through our entire system, you can pull down the certification on our website that talks about the 4-1 certification and how we received that back at the end of last year. We are also looking at having the 4-2 on the L8. We already received it. Now it's just a matter of getting the documentation out. So we are one of the few in the industry on the vendor side that has that and can claim that. So as I get a little bit more information, I'll try to see about sending that and having so that Wayne puts that as part of his connection into the user group. Anything come up? So what I'm going to do now is just talk through a few of the things that you could potentially do right now with your control system without even talking about CIP security. So one of the things that we usually forget to talk about is the fact that there's a key switch on the front of our controllers. So from a control logics and compact logics, there's the run, remote, and program mode key switch. From a physical environment, a lot of the things that we can do from cybersecurity are all software based. We usually talk about how we would do the settings on a system, how we would set up a switch, what we can do from a FactoryTalk Security side of it. We rarely ever talk about the controller. So one of the key items is if you don't want somebody remotely monitoring and configuring your controller, you could potentially just put the key switch and run. And at that point, you are not able to connect to it via Studio 5000 from a remote access point. You would have to be physically connected to the network or via USB. So that is kind of key one, something to always remember. The other big one is using port blockers. So like vendors like Conduit, we've kind of pushed these in the past. A lot of times they have little port blockers for the static switches. You can put those. They're color coded, so you can do them per VLAN. You can also lock in your potential Ethernet connections so that you can't remove them without the little key code going in. So at least from a level set, the whole point of a lot of what you're doing from a cybersecurity front is making it difficult for the end user, the person, the attacker to do something. And in most cases, if they see a lock in the front of the panel, if they see a lock in the front of the switches, that might be enough to deter them. Usually we're talking about it from a remote avenue, but again, these are just a couple of things that you'd be able to do. From the software point of view, I'm going to be talking about the source protection, how we would do access control, the trust slot designation. And then when I start getting into the conversation with the actual CIP security, this will be when we start getting into the encrypted communication side. So one of the things that we've had from a Studio 5000 environment, so this is our development platform for the control logics and compact logics. We've been able to do source protection via a small password key down all the way back to version 8. In usual, this is a laptop. There's a specific key that would go when it comes to the application set inside of Studio 5000. At that level, you can have it so that every laptop has to have the same key. And at that point, if you don't have the key, you don't have access to the application on the ACD file. So that is one level. I will tell you it's not necessarily the most secure level, but it is something that you can provide, especially if you're looking at from a system integrator or an OEM, a quick way of making sure that only dedicated laptops are able to access it. As of version 20 of Studio 5000, we introduced what's called FactoryTalk Security. And this is where from a FactoryTalk administration console, we can now manage what you can do from the software side, not only from a Studio 5000 environment, but also FactoryTalk View, FactoryTalk Asset Center, FactoryTalk Vantage Point, all of the FactoryTalk platform pieces, also down to the controller level. So if I wanted to, I can make it so the control logics and compact logics that are version 20 and above have the ability of securing that content based off what I said in my administration console. So, and if I wanted to make that a Windows domain authentication method, I can make it so that somebody tying into my controller, whether it's directly to the unit or via remote, would have to authenticate against my Active Directory before they have access. And then based on that user right, I can choose whether or not they have full control or whether they have read-only access into the application. So those are a couple of things that if you guys are not aware, let me know and I can send you some information just so you guys can see that. There is no license requirement on there that is built into the product as of right now. Something that we released in version 30 is source and execution license. So this is a partnership that we've done where we can provide hardware-based licensing. This is either going to be an SD card or a USB key to be able to provide and link this through a cloud-based service so that if you think about it from an OEM perspective, you can lock down your intellectual property and license that out and provide those license keys to individuals. So this is usually less on the end user side and more on SIs or OEMs. So that is something that it is new. It would be a subscription service that we provide. So that it would be kind of an upper end level of security that we have the option to do. It would only also work on the 5380 compact logics and also the L8 controllers. So something that is existing right now, and again, you can do this without any licensing. This is just from a controller and Studio 5000 to the adapters. We have what's called secure slot. So one of the easiest thing, and this is usually a comment to all my system integrators, if I have a chassis, a 10-slot chassis, and one of my slots is empty, what I realistically would be able to do if there was no security whatsoever is take a off-the-shelf Ethernet adapter, my En4 TR, put it into the blank slot that would be in that control logics, connect directly to that, and now I'm through the backplane and I can get into the configuration file of my ACD file. What I can do with secure slot is I can pick and choose what adapters or what cards are enabled for configuration. So in most cases, we start talking about segregating your IO network from your HMI network. If I wanted to make it so that my IO network connection had no ability of being able to do any configuration, even if somebody plugged into the switch or to that adapter port on the local inside, they wouldn't be able to get into the Studio 5000 configuration file. It would get blocked. They would have to go through the specific slot that I can choose on this screen. And that's done through the controller property settings when you set your ACD file into an L7 or L8 processor. The other thing to note on the bottom of that slide over here is this change detection. I can set it so that anytime I'm done commissioned with my project, I can set that little hex value that's there as my signature for the controller. that configuration button has about 30 different options on what signifies a change. The default options, if you change the key position on that controller, it would signify a change of that signature. And from either Asset Center or directly on the controller, I'd be able to tell you that there was a change done to that system. Asset Center would be able to tell you exactly what that change was. So these are some of the things that are already pre-built into the controller that you may or may not be using or may not have a need to, realistically. One of the other things that you can do here, so this one's match project to the controller. From a L7 or an L8 point of view, I can make it so that the serial number for that processor is tied to my ACD file. So this would be protected against somebody just grabbing the controller and plugging another one back in there. This would lock down that application to that specific control logics chassis and just the processor itself. And again, L7 or L8. Inside of my Studio 5000 environment, when I'm creating my application, there's a column that got added into the controller scope or program scope, and it's called external access. If I go into external access, by default, everything says read write. So if I'm tying this into my FactoryTalk View SE system and looking at it from an HMI point of view, I can read and write to any point that I add into my HMI, as long as from a code environment, I allow those connections. So if I try to write into an analog input, I'm going to get overridden all the time. So what will end up happening here is you have three options. You have read write, read only, or none. If you make that none, the HMI or any external source would not be able to see that point whatsoever. So at that point, you're blocking any access to be able to do anything. If you make it read only, even if you try to write to it from the HMI or external source, it will not be overwritten. It will stay constant. The other option there that you see is constant. If I select that, imagine setting a set point that's a constant. The only way I can change that set point value is not from the HMI or anything external. I would have to open up Studio 5000 and change that value inside of the code. And that would allow me to change the set point from 70 to 72, but it would be a constant. There's a trigger inside of Asset Center that is looking for that constant. And if that constant value changes, it signifies a code change and red flags Asset Center. So you're aware of it and it's logged in the system. So those are a couple of things that we have in our controller as of right now that we can enable without having to add any additional licensing. So I'll pause really quick. Do we have any questions, anything? You guys are a quiet crowd. That's either I'm doing great or horribly, one of the two. I'll let you guys decide. So I'll just jump into it now with on the CIP Security. So this is where I'll transition into what we're doing new for CIP Security. This is going to be a secure Ethernet IP transportation method. We are looking at three independent things that we can define inside of CIP. And again, CIP is Common Industrial Protocol. It's part of ODVA. You can get more information directly either from our website or you can go straight to ODVA and they have information regarding CIP and CIP security. We have multiple vendors that are also looking at creating connections that are CIP secure. So it will not be a solely Rockwell solution. We'll have this as part of our overall family of Encompass partners as well. What we're doing here is looking at endpoint protection, so device to device, data integrity and authentication, making sure that the data that you send is the correct data and that it's received without being modified. And then data confidentiality, which is going to be either a TSL or a DTSL, which is an existing architecture designed now where we can do the encryption method. So I'll talk about these for a little bit more information. I'm going to go over this again after I talk about what exactly CIP security is. So don't worry about all the stuff on the board. But again, one of the things that we're going to be focused on is the authentication method that we can do, the integrity level, and the confidentiality. And then we're going to be talking about two distinct pieces. One is a new product that just released, I think it was last month. It had been out for like 2 days over the last user group. That will be our new Ethernet adapter module. So I'll talk about that. So it's our En4 TR. And then the other one is FactoryTalk Policy Manager, which is not released yet from Rockwell. We're probably another 4 weeks out. So I expect probably end of May as of right now. But this is what's going to allow us to manage this entire infrastructure side. So first things first, new product. I'm not sure if anybody's actually seen this or not yet, but I know we've been talking about it. So this is a 1756 En4 TR. This will eventually be a replacement of the existing En2 TR. So we will start seeing this kind of go forward. Right now, the En2 TR is still an active product, but eventually we will start seeing that transition to active mature. What the En4 TR gains us is, so this would be enabled for CIP Security. And one of the things that you guys should be aware of when it comes to Rockwell, we never turn on security to start off with. That is a choice that you guys would do after you buy it. So out of the box, this thing will look just like an En2 TR, like anything else. You have the option to turn on security, and some of the options that I'll show you on how we would configure this will show you what we can do at that level. This will also allow now 1 gig connection speeds. So the existing En2 2TR and 2T are maxed at 100 meg. So going after our high performance architecture, when we start talking about the L8s and the 5380 compact logics, this would also accept 1 gig connection speeds. And as of right now, the first release does support device level ring. So that means that we have a 1 gig device level ring ability here. You will have an SD card. You'll be able to do explicit protect mode, so you can make it so that you are not allowed to make changes while this guy is running. So this would be a hardware switch that goes in. In the future, what we'll see from this is we currently have an En2 or the PRP card. The En4 TR will support PRP. This will be a firmware upgrade in the future. Right now, we're looking at around automation fair timeframe for some of these updates. We will also be supporting the ability of having redundant adapters into the same IO chassis. So one of the things that customers have been asking for is the ability of being able to put 2 Ethernet adapters side by side without the need of having to make any code configuration changes on the system. Yes. So Chris, for your question, this is available now. This released as, let's see, I think end of April timeframe. And then the other big one that you guys see there is for future is ControlLogic's redundancy. This will support redundancy. Right, as of right now, it does not. We will also see this in place when we have L8 redundancy much later next year, like summer timeframe. A couple of things just so you guys can see kind of differences. En2T on the left-hand side, En4T on the right-hand side. So we will be able to support SIL 2 on the GuardLogix platform and also SIL 3 using GuardLogix. If we're still looking at a process safety SIL 2, I urge you to stay with the En2 TR. That will be our path forward going on that. But we will have conformal coding, XT, and like I said, right now we do support DLR. We also support the CIP Security. There is also going to be a change to what we can do from a technology point of view. So similar idea when we move to an L8 and the 5380, the speed, the changes, the buffer size, everything moved to a higher quality. So what we'll see here in the En4T, just to give a couple of examples, the number of TCP/IP connections goes up to 512. The number of class 1 messages, so that's IO-based messaging, goes up to 1,000. Class 3 on the messaging, so think of more HMI traffic, goes up to 528. So there's a lot of different things there. And then for any of my motion buffs out there, integrated motion access, this one card will be similar to the En4. It will have 256 axes of motion on that one adapter versus 128 that we're doing on the 3. So that even doubles in size there. So if you have any questions on the card, or if you want to get any quotes or anything, just let us know. We'll be happy to work with you guys, but this is a product that has released. So if you're looking at newer systems, especially if you want to take advantage of the 1 gig connection, make sure to look at see what we can do with a En4 TR. So as an overview to CIP Security, there's going to be 5 specific products that support it to start off with. We will be working on creating newer products and also looking at the existing products and what we can do right now. First one there is FactoryTalk Links. So the actual services platform where FactoryTalk Links resides will be supporting CIP Security, and you'll see from some of the examples that I'll be showing how we would do intercommunication here. So when we're talking about the data servers, whether it's FactoryTalk Historian, FactoryTalk View, the Vantage Point piece, all of those, the underlying technology there is FactoryTalk Links. So we'll be able to do secure communication between those specific FactoryTalk pieces and the hardware. The 5580 there, that is the L8. So again, it's the newer L8 with the Ethernet port in the front of it. The new En4 TR that we just talked about. The PowerFlex 7055T family, and then also the Kinetics 5700 side for the motion side. So we're going to be talking about how we handle authentication, integrity, and the confidentiality. Those are all settable pieces. So one of the things that if you have a requirement to look at CIP security, you do not have to turn all of these on at the same time. And realistically, one of the things that we'll talk about as we go forward on this is you will see a performance hit if you turn on all of this, especially if we're looking at encryption between pieces of equipment. So we'll talk through those, and you guys feel free to ask questions as we go through it. So if I'm looking at the example between an Ethernet adapter and FactoryTalk Links, so let's imagine that's my HMI on the top end side. When I'm looking at authentication, this is going to be preventing unauthorized devices from creating a connection. So think of your rogue laptop. So what we can do at this side of it is with CIP Security is I can create a certificate very similar to your HTTPS. So anytime you go to your bank website, there's a little lock on the top end side. Instead of using your standard port 80, you're using a secure port there, and there's extra methods. So there's usually a certificate that has to be enabled from a vendor or from a certifying body. So what we're going to do here is if you turn on authentication in this identity side with CIP Security between the 2 products, I can now set a certificate back and forth so that it enables that secure communication. What this does is I now have a connection between my FactoryTalk HMI and my En4 TR. So I'm all secure there. What this doesn't do is it does not prevent somebody from just connecting to the piece of equipment that's there. So I can't go directly on it, but if that one attacker now does the man in the middle that we talked about at the beginning part of it. So now it's not a direct connection to either my control system or to my HMI, but where if I'm now looking at it from a man in the middle, where they take the place of, imagine the network switch. So they're looking at the traffic coming both in from the HMI and in from the En4 TR. That hacker or the attacker would be able to now still see and potentially send commands because you protected the endpoints. You didn't necessarily protect what was in between. So what we would do here at that level is start looking at the integrity of the data so that we're not, you don't have the ability of making changes. So how we handle this is through HMAC. So it's a hashed ability of being able to look at the values in between and provide an integrity level so that you know from certainty that the value that you're sending via your packet has been checked and verified from one end to another and know that it has not changed. Very similar to what I mentioned earlier on the controller, where you have your signature there. If there's any changes to that code, that signature address changes, so Asset Center would be able to track it. If you turn on your integrity on this side of it, you'll be able to see you'll have a hash key authentication code from one end to another. Now you'd be protecting both your endpoints and also the transmission in between. So at that point, you now turn that on. You won't be able to get man in the middle. So what they have an option to potentially is you are now protecting the data from being changed, but not necessarily protecting it from being viewed. So think of Wireshark. So if anybody out there has played with Wireshark on a switch side of it, you may not be changing any of the values, but you want to be able to mirror a specific port to be able to view the traffic that's going through to potential locations. A lot of the times this confidentiality is at the IP level, so you want to be able to protect your intellectual property. So even if somebody is able to get on your network and see the information, you're protecting them against being able to make modifications. But if it's important enough that you want to be able to prevent them from even being able to see the information, whether that's the reverse engineering the code that's going through or the packets, now we can turn on confidentiality, which is looking at it from an encryption point of view. And this is where we would create the handshake with TLS and DTLS. So that the only big difference there is when we're talking about class 1 or class 3 messaging. So this is just how we would handle from either from an IO or the top end integrity level. And it will deny unauthorized parties from being able to eavesdrop or being able to monitor that information. So at that level, you'd be able to kind of turn on all three of these. Again, you don't have to necessarily turn on all three at the same time. This gives you full authentication of being able to, one, protect the endpoints, protect the transport method, and also protect against anybody being able to see what you're sending on the encryption side. Now, I will tell you one of the big caveats on this guy. If you turn on all three of these, and I was talking about communication latency between that En4 TR and the links connection, especially if I'm talking about connection between my controller, let's say controller to controller, and I was doing peer-to-peer on class 1, so consumer and producer tags. The overhead that I would potentially add to my controller and to the packet delay could be anywhere from 20 to 30% if I turn on all three of these. Because when you start talking about what you can do and how you would overlay this so that your individual pipe itself is secure, but on top of that, I'm also making it so that all of the packets inside of it are now protected. There are extra layers of security that go involved with that, to the point where you now have to think of it for anybody that's done A to D conversions and the delays that you see on that side of it. Think of it the same way for packets. I'm now looking at it so that I have to both encrypt the message and unencrypt it. I was going to say decrypt it, but I don't know if that's the right term. When you go through it, so there's that added latency that we would see from that level. So the recommendation that I'd give you, and I can sit down and kind of work with you guys on this side of it, is we would do encryption from the top end. So from an En4 TR to a FactoryTalk links, that overhead delay is going to be minimal, because at that level, all we're doing is scanning the controller. But if we're doing critical communication and I needed to do controller to IO or controller to controller, there is a potential there that where, especially controller to IO, I don't want any delays at that level. So I would look at it differently on what I would turn on when it comes to especially the confidentiality on that encryption. So like I said, if you guys have questions on this or we want to start looking at some architectures, I'm all for it. Like I said, I will be in South Louisiana come May, so we can have sit-down conversations. But I just want you guys to be aware of the fact that this is not something that you would want to turn on for everything. So before I start talking about how we would manage this entire system, one of the things I wanted to level set, and thank you for Zachary for pointing this out that I didn't actually mention this, zone and conduit models. So in the 62443 documentation that I was referencing at the very beginning, I said one of the big things is how to create a zone and conduit model. So when I'm looking at your overall infrastructure, most of the time you have a pretty laid out infrastructure and how you would tie in with your individual panels, individual buildings, the routers, switches, layer 2, layer 3 switches in between, potentially wireless connections, things of that nature. What we're doing from a zone and conduit model perspective is I would reference a zone or a security zone as a logical or physical grouping of assets that all share common ideas. So think of a BPCS versus an SIS. Those would be two independent zones because they require different type of security responsibilities in between. So if on a simplistic term, if we're looking at the drawing that's there that I stole from 62443 on the ISA side, we have Industrial Network 1, Industrial Network 2. Those may be two separate panels, but right now we're treating them as one specific zone. They could be split into two independent zones depending on what requirements and what security target levels we needed for those avenues. The conduits, a little bit simpler on that side of it. It's either logical or physical grouping communication channel. This could potentially just be your Ethernet connection between two switches, location to location. There's more that goes with it, but as you can see, so the green little hash circles there would be the conduits in this piece, and it's a connection between the firewall that's in one of the zones to the managed switch on the other zone. So the reason why I bring that up is when I start talking about FactoryTalk Policy Manager, this will be the solution that comes out in about a month and a half from Rockwell. This is how we're going to manage your configuration for CIP Security. Very similar idea as your FactoryTalk Administration Console. It will be a one-stop shop for being able to set up all of your systems, your zones, your conduits, and your individual devices. It will be on a separate box, so we can have this be completely separate from your FactoryTalk platform. But what this will do is allow you for specific access for whoever it is that's managing your cybersecurity side of it. So you would be able to provide this, and I'll show you a couple screenshots that'll show how we would look at this. But eventually we're looking at it from your zones, your conduits, and your individual devices that are in each one of these. So we would be providing the policy and the identity pieces for each one of these. When you see the legend on the right-hand side here, we're talking about how we would provide connections between your trusted devices. So this may be one of the 5 devices that we were talking about earlier that already have CIP Security, or we would be able to do connections to devices that are either legacy or do not currently have CIP Security built into it. So think of like an E300, a switch, a panel view. Panel view is probably a really good example on this slide, where we can do whitelisting as well. So I'll get into that in a little bit, and then showing you everything we're doing from the certificates. So if we have FactoryTalk Policy Manager on the top and left-hand side, we'll have our FactoryTalk View system, our Studio 5000, and we have 2 independent systems, whether this is a machine or process skid. We have our switch, our independent laptop, the controllers, banner views, and drives. So what we would look as a sample deployment, or how we would break this guy up, is I can set up 3 independent zones. My zone 1, left-hand side, zone 2, and then my zones for my computers. As you notice, my FactoryTalk Policy Manager up here is not part of the zone configuration because it is a completely independent entity. So what I would be able to do here is set up my individual devices, how I would set up the path through the conduit, and what tie-ins, what certificates, what whitelisting that we would be able to do. And the reason why I would have 2 separate zones, as I mentioned earlier, is imagine one is your DCS or your BPCS, and the other one is your SIS system on the safety side. you want to have two distinct paths, two distinct type of security policies for those two independent zones. If both of these systems use the exact same zoning requirements, so the same users are going to be tying into it, same type of devices, then that would interact as one big zone. So this gives you some flexibility on how you would deploy these zoning conduits. So this is a quick representation of what you guys would look to see. So once FactoryTalk Policy Manager is installed, you'd be able to add your devices. The device configuration there is going to be your standard Flex Links or FactoryTalk Links connection. So you'd be able to either discover your devices or do independent devices. So it's the exact same infrastructure that you guys are used to there. But what you'll see on the small end picture there is you're going to be able to define your zones, your individual conduits, and then see all the devices. And each device that you add into the system will tell you exactly what kind of security and what zones they belong to. So you're not going to be able to overlap the systems. You're going to be able to set everything based on your zoning requirements. So as I create my zone, in my older example, I might have a zone 1, zone 2, zone 3. It will look to see what my authentication method is. So if you see on the right-hand side, so CIP Security communication, if I enable CIP Security, I will get the 3 options that we were talking about earlier. My authentication method. So this is either going to be a predefined certificate or a pre-shared key. If you create a public key, you can ask it to create a key for you, or you can use a key that you designate. And that's usually going to be a big, gigantic number association for it. So that would be able to do your device-to-device level security. When we start talking about the data and that hash that I was talking about, being able to provide, making sure that the data or the packet hasn't changed from when it first leaves the controller to when it gets to the HMI, that would be your IO data security. So that's your selection point here. And then you also have on the security side of what you're looking at, whether or not you plan to do encryption. So you would turn that guy on here. The other thing that you will see from a newer system where this isn't, it would take a little bit for you guys to do it via configuration. Anything that is enabled for the CIP security from FactoryTalk Policy Manager, you will be able to disable both port 80 and port 443, which is the HTTPS. So as you guys know, almost every single Ethernet device that we have comes with a web page connection so that you can see the configuration, you can see the information. From an L8 control logics perspective, you'd be able to use that for task monitor to be able to see how your system is doing. In the cybersecurity realm, one of the big policy no-nos is usually to make sure that all HTTP traffic is turned off on your system. So if that is a requirement for as part of your cybersecurity policy, you can just go in there and hit the check boxes. They'll disable all the USB, all the connection points to your websites. The other slide here, just so you guys can see, is how we would go about adding devices. So again, you can add your devices directly into the zones on the top end. I know it's kind of hard to see, but you have discovered devices, add devices, and you can also add a IP address range. So if you want to be able to discover ranges within a specific panel and you know that they're 10.12 to 45, you can add that range and see what shows up. Once the information is in, at that point, you can designate what type of security, what zones that you're tying into, and define the conduits and things of that nature. And again, at the level, if I'm looking at what's highlighted here, that would be an L85E, so it's an L8 controller. That is enabled for CIP security. So I would be able to see more information as to where the IP address is, what zone policy it's looking at, disabling the TCP and UDP ports. And then the zone will handle what it is that I can tie into. So a couple of use case scenarios. So that is some screenshots. Like I said, right now, FactoryTalk Policy Manager is set to release within the next 4 to 6 weeks. So I'll send you guys some more information and when that finally releases, and so that we can do a little bit of a deeper dive on it. But if we're looking at this and I wanted to do communication between my controller and my computer. So again, talk about FactoryTalk View from an HMI point of view. I have Studio 5000 as my development. I probably have FactoryTalk View Studio on that box as well. And then I have my 2 controllers. One may be my L8, another one may be my En4 TR. Both of them have CIP Security built in. So from Policy Manager, I would be able to create one large zone. The conduit is just the path through the networking side of it. I would be able to turn on my integrity level, and realistically in this case is just share my certifications between these. So the idea here is if another rogue laptop gets onto this system and wants to be able to do communication between the existing FactoryTalk and the controller, if I have a rogue laptop and it is not part of this zone, it will not be allowed to transmit traffic back and forth between the controller and the FactoryTalk View environment. The way that this would be approached from a cybersecurity front is anything outside of bounds of the zone and anything that you do not define to be enabled, you will not be able to see the piece of equipment. So this would be able to block, very similar to what we do with FactoryTalk Security, but FactoryTalk Security requires you to have your Active Directory, your certifications, or the security be turned on at the controller level. This is securing it from the certification side and from the Ethernet point of view without making modifications to your controller. So that is one specific use case. Another one may be with the same type where we have, let's say, a panel view and maybe another piece of equipment that's out there where if those devices are not CIP securable, where they don't have CIP security built in. So again, a panel view 7 right now is not one of the listed items that upon first release will have CIP security. What I can do is do whitelisting. So FactoryTalk Policy Manager will allow me to create a list of accessible devices that are, for lack of a better term, okay to communicate with. So as you create your zone, you can go in and create a whitelist. Imagine the same idea as your antivirus, where your antivirus is going in and creating a list of known things that can connect. And if you guys have ever seen the little flag that shows up in your laptop saying, okay, you're going to the Rockwell website. Rockwell is trying to download a firmware kit to your laptop. They're certified. It's okay. We see them. We know they're okay. Same thing here. You would create a policy inside of FactoryTalk Policy Manager for those the panel view, potentially any laptop that's on there. And you would create a whitelist IP address range where as long as that device is in that IP address range to that equipment, you are okay to communicate with them. So this is a method that we'd be able to, again, that security onion, where we can do multiple levels of authentication on this, where it's not just looking at the CIP security devices, but also your entire architecture as a whole. I think we got a question. Okay. So now if we go back to this nasty, gigantic looking slide. So when we're talking about CIP security, again, we're talking about how we would handle authentication from a device to device piece of equipment, how we would handle the data integrity. So looking at it from tampering and modification of the packets that we're sending, whether we're talking about a controller to controller or controller to software. And then when we're talking about confidentiality, which would be encryption of that data to prevent anyone from being able to see or monitor the information that you're sending in. This is extremely important when we're trying to protect your intellectual property. This is extremely important, again, when you're trying to send data from one conduit, one zone to another. and going through a conduit where we would normally do either a firewall or we were looking at something like intrusion detection for an IDS type system with our Stratix 5950. These would be able to protect us so that the information at the local level does not need to be secure and encrypted, but when we send the information up through the pipe at that level, we wouldn't want that level of confidentiality. So on the right-hand side, we're going to be looking at all of the FactoryTalk system platform side, including FactoryTalk Links, which would be our main one, FactoryTalk Policy Manager, which we'll release in about 4 to 6 weeks. That's how we're going to be able to manage this entire side of it. We're going to have our communication through FactoryTalk Links, and then from a device level communication, the L8 processor is currently CIP Security enabled. The En4 TR that we just talked about, that is also CIP Security enabled. We have another device that I think hopefully at TechEd, they're going to announce and do a kind of deeper dive when it comes to Automation Fair, and hopefully release at Automation Fair. There's going to be a CIP Security proxy. Think of a small switch hub that we can put to be able to tie in multiple devices that would not support CIP Security as of right now, to be able to tie in and have a secure interface from panel to panel or panel to location. So I'll get you guys more information as we get closer to that. And then the other devices that we were talking about, so the Kinetics, the PowerFlex 755T, those are ones that we have right now. You'll have the ability to be able to disable HTTP and HTTPS. So that's your port 80 and port 443. And then we'll also have the ability through this system on Policy Manager to be able to create defined zones and conduits so that we can look at an overall architecture, and that you can start looking at what level of information and what devices, even down to the laptop side, can communicate between different pieces of it. And we will be able to support legacy systems through whitelisting. So again, we'd be able to specify the communication type, the IP addresses that we would be able to communicate to, and that would all be handled via FactoryTalk Policy Manager.
Yeah, so there's a question on that too about could you whitelist perhaps on MAC address as well, or is it IP only?
So as of right now, from what I've heard, the whitelisting is only on an IP level. I think they are looking to see if there's any options that we have from a MAC address. If you are looking at a MAC address level, what I would recommend is we have our Stratix level switches. So the 5700, the 5400 switch have the ability of creating access control lists inside of it and do port learning. So that would be down to the MAC level. So if you have, let's say, either a thin client or a specific laptop that you want to plug in, you can make it so that it learns that specific MAC address, and if a different MAC address or a different laptop gets connected into that switch, it would get denied. So that is something that, if that is a requirement right now, we might be able to do that via the switch, not necessarily needing CIP Security. So that kind of covers it from what I had, guys, but feel free to start adding in your questions. I know we're pretty much right at the button, but I'm happy to continue if you guys have some questions or anything that you want to ask.
Yep, feel free to add in, or type of question, or could possibly unmute your line too if you like to ask it live. But a lot of good information. I know we didn't really do I'll give you a minute to type in perhaps as we wrap it up. We didn't really. It was kind of hard to explain the topic ahead of time, so I appreciate everybody joining and wanting to learn about CIP Security. So it's going to be really nice to see that and get.
And one thing for you guys to know, sorry, Wayne. One thing for you guys to know, might be typing in some questions. We do have 2 spots on our website that you guys should be aware of if you're not already. So there's a incident response site on our knowledge base. It's knowledge base article 54102. If you haven't subscribed to this, I would highly recommend you subscribe to it. It's our Industrial Security Advisory Index. You can go in there and see any notices or alerts on any of our products, whether we're talking micrologics, switches, and anything that comes through from IACS cert, we will have a response to it and a mitigation response for anything that you have. Most of the time, that's going to be dealt with how we would handle firmware upgrades on switches and things of that nature. So that's a big one for you guys to be aware of. And then if there's anything that you need from our security landing page, if you go to our website, look at our security page, you can see the same security advisory index that I was talking about, the Microsoft patch qualification, which was referred to as like Patch Tuesday. They've done a roll-up patch of every month. So you can go in there and see what we tie into from a Microsoft patch side of it. And then all those reference architectures that I was talking about are all on that site.
A couple questions about the hours and or the slides and the presentation. So we do post them to our archive, and I will email all attendees a link to that, so you can always refer back to this and watch the recorded presentation. PDH hours, I will send those out as well. Just give me a day or so to prepare those, and I will email all the attendees the PDH hours. So good questions. Luis, excellent presentation. We're a little late, so we'll go ahead and wrap it up, but appreciate everybody's participation. And we will be back to a live audience option in May, finally. We had the last 2 months, we had conflicts in the room and we couldn't do the live audience. So the New Orleans, the local guys, you're more welcome to come join us in the branch. And
I'll finally be able to get lunch.
Yeah, you'll get a lunch, and Luis will actually be here live and in person. So he won't just be a voice.
And I am planning on running for a demo on that one, so.
Yeah, so anyway, you'll see all the announcements of that here soon enough. So, all right, everybody have a great Easter break or spring break, and thanks for attending.
Thanks for listening, guys. I appreciate it.
All right, Luis, thanks.